to chapter 13 of A Long Walk to Water. So before we begin, as usual, I'm just going to go over some vocabulary that will be in this chapter. So the word din is used. It means a loud, unpleasant, repeating noise. So like if there's something outside that's like crashing, like a broken piece of metal or a wind chime or something that's like crashing into something, you might say there was like a continuous din outside. If someone's voice just like doesn't stop and they like talk nonstop and it's really loud, you might describe their voice as a din, like the din of their voice. The word marvel is used, and it's not talking about Marvel Comics. I know a lot of you think that, but it's being used as a verb. And when you say that something is marveling, or if you are marveling at something, it means that you are filled with wonder or astonishment, that you're amazed. So if you ever make it to the Grand Canyon, you will probably marvel at the beauty of what you see. The word astounding is similar. You guys might know this word. It just means to be surprisingly impressive, shocking, or stunning. So you might be astounded to learn a fact, or you might be it might be astounding to watch the Olympics to see what people are able to do. The word plague is used in this chapter, and it's used as a verb, and that just means to cause or experience trouble, distress, or suffering. So some people right now, while we are quarantined, are plagued with an anxiety. They are just experiencing a lot of difficulty. The word peril is used, and peril is just another word for danger or risk. So for people who are working on the front lines, they may feel like every day going to work is like walking into peril, going into a dangerous situation. The word determination, you guys might hear a lot. It's similar to perseverance, which is like one of our shoms. It means to have a firm purpose, strong spirit, or stubbornness. So you might be really determined to score a goal in soccer, and you might work at it, every single game because you are determined to score that goal. The word coax is used. It basically means to gently and persistently persuade somebody. So if you are babysitting and the child that you are watching does not want to go to bed, you might want to coax them to go to bed. You'll be like, oh, well, if you go to bed, I'll read you a story or I'll do this. And the word recall basically just means to remember something. If you recall events from last week, you're remembering what you did. All right, so let's jump into chapter 13, Southern Sudan, 2009. Naya thought it was funny. You had to have water to find water. Water had been flowing constantly into the borehole to keep the drill running smoothly. The crew drove to the pond and back several times a day. The pond water was piped into what looked like a giant plastic bag, a bag big enough to fill the entire bed of the truck. The bag sprang a leak. The leak had to be patched. The patch sprang a leak. The crew patched the patch. Then the bag sprang another leak. The drilling could not go on. The drilling crew was discouraged by the leaks. They wanted to stop working, but their boss kept them going. All the workers wore the same blue coveralls. Still, Naya could tell who was the boss. He was one of the two men who had first come to the village. The other man seemed to be his main assistant. The boss would encourage the workers and laugh and joke with them. If that didn't work, he would talk to them earnestly and try to persuade them. And if that didn't work, he would get angry. He didn't get angry very often. He kept working and kept the others working too. They patched the bag again. The drilling went on. So now we're switching to Salva's story, which is in Ethiopia, Sudan, and Kenya for the span of 1991 to 1992 is kind of this next stretch. Hundreds of people lined the riverbank. The soldiers were forcing some of them into the water, prodding them with their rifle butts, shooting into the air. Other people, afraid of the soldiers and their guns, were leaping into the water on their own. They were immediately swept downstream by the powerful current. As Salva crouched on the bank and watched, a young man near him plunged into the water. The current carried him swiftly downstream, but he was also making little progress across the river. Then Salva saw the telltale flick of a crocodile's tail as it flopped into the water near the young man. Moments later, the man's head jerked oddly. Once, twice, his mouth was open. Perhaps he was screaming, but Salva could not hear him over the din of the crowd and the rain. A moment later, the man was pulled under. A cloud of red stained the water, so this guy looks to be eaten by a crocodile on his way across the river. The rain was still pouring down, and now bullets were pouring down as well. The soldiers started shouting into the river, aiming their guns at the people who were trying to get across. Why? Why are they shooting at us? Salva had no choice. He jumped into the water and began to swim. A boy next to him grabbed him around the neck and clung to him tightly. Salva was forced under the surface without time to take more than a quick, shallow breath. Salva struggled, kicking, clawing. He's holding on to me too hard. I can't. Air! No air left. Suddenly, the boy's grip loosened, and Salva launched himself upward. He threw his head back and took a huge gulp of air. For a few moments, he could do nothing but gasp and choke. When his vision cleared, he saw why the boy had let go. He was floating with his head down, blood streaming from a bullet hole in the back of his neck. Stunned, Salva realized that being forced under the water had probably saved his life, meaning that if the boy hadn't have jumped on him, he probably would have gotten shot instead of that boy. But there was no time to marvel over this fact that his life was saved. More crocodiles were launching themselves off the banks. The rain, the mad current, the bullets, the crocodiles, the welter of arms and legs, the screams, the blood. He had to get across somehow. Salva did not know how long he was in the water. It felt like hours. It felt like years. When at last the tips of his toes touched mud, he forced his limbs to make swimming motions one last time. He crawled onto the riverbank and collapsed. Then he lay there in the mud, choking and sobbing for breath. Later, he would learn that at least 1,000 people had died trying to cross the river that day, drowned or shot or attacked by crocodiles. How was it that he was not one of the 1,000? Why was he one of the lucky ones? The walking began again. Walking, but to where? No one knew anything for sure. Where was Salva supposed to go? So last we saw, he is here in the Gilo River. That's kind of where he was. Not home. There is still war everywhere in Sudan. Not back to Ethiopia. The soldiers would shoot us. Kenya. There are supposed to be refugee camps in Kenya. I know that my face is blocking it, but Kenya is over here. So he now wants to go from the river to Kenya in search of more refugee camps. So I'm continuing. If you're following along in the PDF, I'm on page 80. Salva made up his mind. He would walk south to Kenya. He did not know what he would find once he got there, but it seemed to be his best choice. Crowds of other boys followed him. Nobody talked about it, but by the end of the first day, Salva had become the leader of a group of about 1,500 boys. Some of them were as young as 5 years old. Those smallest boys reminded Salva of his brother Kuol. But then he had an astounding thought. Kuol isn't that age anymore. He's a teenager now. Salva found that he could only think of his brothers and sisters as they were when he had last seen them, not as they would be now. They were traveling through a part of Sudan still plagued by war. The fighting and bombing were worse during the day, so Salva decided that the group should hide when the sun shone and do their walking at night. But in the darkness, it was hard to be sure they were headed in the right direction. Sometimes the boys traveled for days only to realize that they had gone in a huge circle. This happened so many times that Salva lost count. They met other groups of boys, all walking south. Every group had stories of terrible peril. Again, that means danger. Boys who had been hurt or killed by bullets or bombs, attacked by wild animals, or left behind because they were too weak or sick to keep up. When Salva heard the stories, he thought of Mariel. He felt his determination growing, as it had in the days after his uncle's death. I will get us safely to Kenya, he thought, no matter how hard it is. He organized the group, giving everyone a job, scavenge for food, collect firewood, stand guard while the group slept. Whatever food or water they found was shared equally among them. When the smaller boys grew too tired to walk, the older boys took turns carrying them on their backs. There were times when some of the boys did not want to do their share of the work. Salva would talk to them, encourage them, coax, and persuade them. Once in a while, he had to speak sternly or even shout, but he tried not to do this too often. It was as if Salva's family were helping him, even though they were not there. He remembered how he had looked after his little brother Kuol, but he also knew what it felt like to have to listen to the older ones, Arik and Ring, and he could recall the gentleness of his sisters, the strength of his father, the care of his mother. Most of all, he remembered how Uncle had encouraged him in the desert. One step at a time, one day at a time, just today, just this day to get through. Salva told himself this every day. He told the boys in the group too. And one day at a time, the group made its way to Kenya. More than 1,200 boys arrived safely. It took them a year and a half. Stay tuned for chapter 14.
All right, guys, welcome back to another chapter of A Long Walk to Water. Today we are going to be reading chapter 14 together. I am loving this book, and I hope that you are as well. As always, if you would like to follow along with us, there's a link to a PDF right down here. Some vocab that you'll need to know for chapter 14. The word drenched is a verb. It means to wet thoroughly or soak. A borehole is a noun. It is a hole drilled into the earth as for the purpose of extracting a core, releasing gas, oil, water, etc. Misery is a noun. It means distress or suffering caused by need, privation, or poverty. The word Arabic, say that all together, Arabic. It's not Arabic, it's Arabic. Arabic is a noun. It is a language developed out of the language of the Arabians of the time of Muhammad, and it's now spoken in the countries of the Middle East and North Africa. Again, that's Arabic, not Arabic. You'll sound a little silly if you say Arabic. It's Arabic. An aid worker is a noun. It's someone who works for a charitable organization devoted to helping others, especially one who works internationally or in conflict zones. So we are in southern Sudan to start out, and it is 2009, and we are with Naya. For 3 days, the air around Naya's home was filled with the sound of the drill. On the third afternoon, Naya joined the other children and gathered around the drill site. The grown-ups rose from their work, pounding at rocks, and drifted over too. The workers seemed excited. They were moving quickly as the leader called out orders. Then, whoosh! A spray of water shot high in the air. This wasn't the water that the workers had been piping into the borehole. This was new water, water that was coming out of the hole. Everyone cheered at the sight of the water. They all laughed at the sight of the two workers who had been operating the drill. They were drenched, their clothes completely soaked through. A woman in the crowd began singing a song of celebration. Naya clapped her hands along with all the other children. But as Naya watched the water spraying out of the borehole, she frowned. This water wasn't clear. It was brown and heavy looking. It was full of mud. All right, we're moving over to the Ifo refugee camp in Kenya. The years 1992 to 1996. Fun fact, I was born in 1996. Great year. This is from the perspective of Salva. We are at the Ifo refugee camp in Kenya. Salva was now 22 years old. For the past 5 years, he had been living in refugee camps in northern Kenya. The first at the Kakuma camp, then at Ifo. Kakuma had been a dreadful place, isolated in the middle of a dry, windy desert. Tall fences of barbed wire enclosed the camp. You weren't allowed to leave unless you were leaving for good. It felt almost like a prison. 70,000 people lived at Kakuma. Some said it was more, 80 or 90,000. There were families who had managed to escape together, but again, as in Ethiopia, most of the refugees were orphaned boys and young men. The local people who lived in that area did not like having a refugee camp nearby. They would often sneak in and steal from the refugees. Sometimes fights broke out and people were hurt or killed. After 2 years of misery at Kakuma, Salva decided to leave the camp. He had heard of another refugee camp far to the south and east where he was hoping things would be better. Once again, Salva and a few other young men walked for months, but when they reached the Camp Ifo, they found that things were no different than at Kakuma. Everyone was always hungry and there was never enough food. Many were sick or had gotten injured during their long, terrible journeys to reach the camp. The few medical volunteers could not care for everyone who needed help. Salva felt fortunate that at least he was in good health. He wanted desperately to work to make a little money that he could use to buy extra food. He even dreamed of saving some money so that one day he could leave the camp and continue his education somehow. But there was no work to do. There was nothing to do but wait. Wait for the next meal, for news of the world outside the camp. The days were long and empty. They stretched into weeks, then months, then years. It was hard to keep hope alive when there was so little to feed it. Michael was an aid worker from a country called Ireland. Salva had met a lot of aid workers. They came and went, staying at the camp for several weeks or, at most, a few months. The aid workers came from many different countries, but they usually spoke English to each other. Few of the refugees spoke English, so communication with aid workers was often difficult. But after so many years in the camp, Salva could understand a little English. He even tried to speak it once in a while, and Michael almost always seemed to understand what Salva was trying to say. One day, after the morning meal, Michael spoke to Salva. "You seem interested in learning English," he said. "How'd you like to learn to read?" The lessons began that very day. Michael wrote down 3 letters on a small scrap of paper. A, B, C, he said, handing the scrap to Salva. A, B, C, Salva repeated. The whole rest of the day, Salva went around saying, A, B, C, mostly to himself, but sometimes aloud in a quiet voice. He looked at the paper 100 times and practiced drawing the letters in the dirt with a stick over and over again. Salva remembered learning to read Arabic when he was young. The Arabic alphabet had 28 letters. The English only had 26. In English, the letters stayed separate from each other, so it was easy to tell them apart. In Arabic, the letters were always joined, and a letter might look different depending on what came after it. You can see some examples of what the Arabic alphabet looks like and what some words might look like in Arabic. It looks very different than the English words. Sure, you're doing lovely, Michael said the day Salva learned to write his own name. You learn fast because you work so hard. Salva did not say what he was thinking, that he was working hard because he wanted to learn to read English before Michael left the camp. Salva did not know if any of the other aid workers would take the time to teach him, but once in a while, it's good to take a break from work. Let's do something a wee bit different for a change. I'm thinking you'll be good at this. You're a tall lad. So Salva learned 2 things from Michael, how to read and how to play volleyball. A rumor was spreading through the camp. It began as a whisper, but soon Salva felt as if it was a roar in his ears. He could think of nothing else. America, the United States. The rumor was about 3,000 boys and young men from the refugee camps would be chosen to go to live in America. Salva could not believe it. How could it be true? How would they get there? Where would they live? Surely it was impossible. But as the days went by, the aid workers confirmed the news. It was all anyone could talk about. They only want healthy people. If you are sick, you won't be chosen. They won't take you if you have ever been a soldier with the rebels. Only orphans are being chosen. If you have family left, you have to stay here. Weeks passed, then months. One day, a notice was posted at the camp's administration tent. It was a list of names. If your name was on the list, it meant that you had made it to the next step, the interview. After the interview, you might go to America. Salva's name was not on the list, nor was it on the next list or the one after that. Many of the boys being chosen were younger than Salva. Perhaps America doesn't want anyone too old, he thought. Each time a list was posted, Salva's heart would pound as he read the names. He tried not to lose hope. At the same time, he tried not to hope too much. Sometimes he felt like he was being torn in two by the hoping and the not hoping. One windy afternoon, Michael rushed over to Salva's tent. Salva, come quickly! Your name is on the list today! Salva leapt to his feet and was running even before his friend had finished speaking. When he drew near the administration tent, he slowed down and tried to catch his breath. He might be wrong. It might be another person named Salva. I won't look too soon. From far away, I might see a name that looks like mine, and I need to be sure. Salva shouldered his way through the crowd until he was standing in front of the list. He raised his head slowly and began reading through the names. There it was, Salva Dute, Rochester, New York. Salva was going to New York. He was going to America. Tune in to see what is going to happen next. Bye, guys. Miss you.